There are no farm murders in South Africa. There are no farm murders. No white farmers are being murdered. Cyril Ramaphosa, 2018, lying to Bloomberg Press outside the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Sadly, the facts clearly and incontrovertibly refute the disinformation campaign Ramaphosa launched about farm attacks in New York nearly a decade ago, seeking to hoodwink foreign direct investors into a collapsing country with no electricity, potholes larger than tank traps, rampant kidnappings, the worst ports in the world, corrupt police and politicians at the highest level in government, the highest offices. The last thing Cyril needed the world to see was the truth, the slaughter of South Africa's rural farmers, farm workers, and their families, especially when the victims were white. While violent crime is horrific and affects all demographics and races throughout South Africa, the intentional terroristic targeting of the most vulnerable, the aged, and infirm white South Africans who are isolated in remote rural homes, far from any protection or the interests of the privileged, spoiled, elite, wealthy, blue light brigade ANC politicians is particularly egregious. Robbery is one thing, something far too many black, white, and brown South Africans experience. It is not normal, but the assaults, sexual violations, torture, dismemberment, beatings, and the slaughter of innocent, elderly white South Africans on rural holdings is an epidemic, one intentionally ignored as the ANC-led government national unity pretends it is just normal crime. Why? At this stage, 2+ decades into what has been unfolding, it is obvious to even the most casual observer that this is seldom random crime or home invasions. If it were simply theft, thieves would strike when the residents are not at home, not come in the dark of night to torture wheelchair-bound octogenarians, kill their guard dogs with poison the day before, steal the tires off their buckies so they can't escape, to break into their homes after midnight, tie them down, and torture them to death. It is barbaric. These assaults are the most gruesome one can imagine, sights that often leave even those who daily see frightening trauma left shaken and often in tears. Grown men cry. The list of vulnerable elderly white South Africans tortured in the most heinous ways on farms is simply growing so long that it seems even the most affected, the Afrikaner community, is becoming inured to the tragedy. It is literally lambs to the slaughter across South Africa. Now, I could spend hours reading the names of thousands of parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents tortured, brutalized, and callously murdered in their homes, in their beds, by vermin. But I'll focus on just a few that came to my attention a few short years ago. Glenn and Vita Rafferty, 63 and 60 years old. The Raffertys were ambushed and killed by armed men as they entered their farm home in Normandian near Newcastle after a night out with friends on August 30th, 2020. Edward Neumeister, 67, hacked to death with a punga, bravely sacrificed his life despite a mortal wound so that his partner could escape at his German-themed restaurant, which was closed because of COVID, in KwaZulu-Natal. Meneer Neumeister was left unrecognizable after being hit with dozens of blows from a machete. Dad was hit from behind with machete outside, and it must have hit an artery as there was so much blood. The story recounted by his partner, who survived, to his then 38-year-old daughter Sylvia, who lived in Germany and had to come and identify him. Eddie had gone out to feed our Rottweilers, who were just so soft they barked and ran away when the man attacked, and we think he was there at the time. He must have been lying in wait for him. And what of the Brand family? The July 2020 farm attack in South Africa where Danny Brand, 83 years of age, his wife Breggy, 73 years, and their daughter Elzeby, 54, were brutally murdered on their small holding in Hartswater in the Northern Cape. These are just three of the most high-profile cases from 2020 alone. There are thousands of these stories. But South Africa's shame long predates their deaths and continues unabated since their deaths. The lack of respect for the elderly, the lack of compassion for the vulnerable, the blind eye the ANC-led government national unity turns toward these horrific human rights violations in their midst, pretending it is not happening, using whataboutism to deflect the world's attention from the horrors on farms. Now, you may be wondering why I rehash these stories. It is because while the government of South Africa and the bigotry of the Western world refuses to see or acknowledge what is happening, some of us have not forgotten. We will never forget, and we shall not forgive the callous indifference on display here. More specifically, it continues. The slaughter of Dr. Jane Luck, 71, and her geophysicist husband, Rolf Luck, 77, at their home in Craigs on Wednesday, March 25th, 2026, is just the latest preventable tragedy. It was an absolute bloodbath. All I can say is it was a massacre. I don't want to describe any of the injuries. It's too violent, said their daughter, Charlotte Luck. While at the scene, she said surprisingly, little had been taken from the property. Folks, this is an all too common occurrence. This is not about robbery. It is about intimidation and racial hatred. Racism stoked by politicians who sing songs about murdering white farmers. The goal is to chase white people from the land. There were iPads left on the table, but obviously they took the car, the laptop, and an e-bike. 3 bicycles have also been taken, but nothing else. Folks, this does not surprise me. At the Brits murder scene last year, virtually nothing of value was taken, yet the South African Police Service fraudulently claimed that it was a house robbery. I have the police report. They covered up a farm murder. Charlotte Luck had the daunting task of identifying her parents' bodies at a laboratory on Thursday this week, a sighting she said will replay in her mind over and over again. Imagine the trauma of seeing this as a survivor, the horrific condition of your parents who raised you, brought you into this world. It just seems crazy that they were just so viciously attacked. Charlotte, not when you realize the level of racial hatred whipped up in a segment of South African society. Why the suspect did what he did is something Luck said she cannot make sense of. The viciousness of the attack makes no sense. I guess what went through my mind was how anyone could inflict such vicious injuries on two elderly, kind people who just went through life trying to do good in their community and in the environment around them. It just makes no sense to me, no sense at all. Well, Charlotte, I agree with you, but I also ask questions. How can people gang rape an 80-plus-year-old woman and then shoot her in the face? Easily, when hatred is taught and reinforced with racist songs and chants. Now, a little bit about the Luck family. Dr. Jane was a renowned psychologist and art therapist who spent her career helping people work through their darkest moments. She ran a local Al-Anon support group, helped clear alien vegetation from the farm, and kept paths open down to the her grandchildren could run to Whiskey Creek to swim and fish. She cared for so many people. She specialized in art therapy, helping people get through trauma. She was a real pillar of the local community. For me personally, she's just been the most amazing granny. She's dedicated to her grandchildren, always taking them on hikes, trips up to the mountains, into the gorges. Rolf was a geophysicist, an academic, well-read, and by his daughter's account, one of the most intelligent people she'd ever known. The contributions of these elderly white South Africans that they've made in building a better South Africa for all South Africans are too numerous to note in this brief video. This is the same of so many other elderly white South Africans brutally murdered on rural farm holdings and farms. Black Monday, rallies, protests, community patrols, nothing works. The callous indifference and racial hatred of leading political figures is patently obvious. The lies told to President Trump in the Oval Office, the denials, it's disgusting. Folks, it is high time that South Africa stands up for the elderly, for the vulnerable. Do not count on your uncaring government to change, and do not allow your parents and grandparents to be slaughtered like so many sheep. Protect and defend those who brought you into this world. As I said, this violent crime affects all South Africans, but there's an obvious, clear attempt here to target elderly, vulnerable white South Africans. How the Afrikaans community, how the Boer community, how the colored community, how the Indian community, how the black community can leave the most vulnerable in their midst vulnerable to this sort of activity is beyond comprehension. Farm murders occur around the world. When Ramaphosa denied this at the United Nations, it was a joke to say the least. There are even rural farm murders in America. Rare, but it does happen. People are vulnerable in remote areas, and they can become targeted. But this is more than targeting people in remote areas. This is a campaign to drive people from the land, to slaughter the elderly, knowing full well that younger generations really aren't interested in farming. So you murder the elderly and you get rid of them. But why the tortures? This can only be attributable to racial hatred. When black farmers are murdered, they're rarely tortured or raped or dismembered. The same with Indians and coloreds. This is something reserved for the white South African farmers, the elderly especially. Why? Respect for the elderly, respect for life is at a nadir, and it is time for South Africans to stand up. The dismemberment of the commando system nearly 20 years ago was the first chink in the armor to protect rural South Africans. And they continue to be slaughtered day after day across the country while the world sits back, says, and does nothing. Can you imagine if the per capita ratio of white farmers murdered in Canada was anywhere near as high as it is in South Africa? There'd be a national task force. But instead, you have indifference. Why? Because the government intentionally ignores the trauma, the torture, the dismemberment, the sexual violations of elderly white South Africans. And why? Either they want them off the land or they blame them for apartheid. In either case, these are human rights violations, and the failure of government to do its most basic task to defend its citizens is repulsive. What say you, South Africa? Mzansi. God bless.